Hello everyone. Today I will be featuring the Tier 8 Pan Asian TD, the Hsienyang. I have no idea if I pronounced that correctly. I hope I did. At least you know which ship I mean. Now I'm going to be comparing the Hsienyang to the Benson a lot, since, well, the ship basically is a Benson and everyone is extremely familiar with how the Benson plays because it's a ship that has been largely unchanged and has been in the game for a very long time. First of all, the base health is 15.5k, which is 100 more than Benson's 15.4. They both share 6.4k base conceal, so that's identical concealment, which means, of course, if you slot the concealment expert concealment expert captain and the camo on it, you can reach 5.8k concealment, which is, of course, very strong. The Benson does handle slightly better. The Benson is half a knot faster at 38 knots. The Hsienyang only does 37.5. And while they have the same tight turning circle, the Benson actually has a pretty significantly faster rudder shift at 2.7 seconds, whereas the Hsienyang has one of 3.5. So Benson has slightly better handling in this sense. Now, the guns are almost identical. They both are 127mm guns, 3.3 second reload, 5% fire chance, but worth noting is, as you might notice if you check the bottom left, is that you only have 4 guns on the Hsienyang, and that's the same as the Benson Sea Hull. But the reason people run, of course, the Benson Sea Hull, well, they don't really run it in anything besides competitive most of the time, but the reason people run the Sea Hull is to be able to slot defensive AA. The Hsienyang, however, cannot slot defensive AA. It's not even an option. So you are pretty much permanently outgunned against most Bensons you will face. They will have one more gun than you, with the exact same reload and so forth, so it does translate to a pretty direct 25% DPS increase they have over you, and there's not really much you can do about it. But I mean, you do have a small range increase. You have a 12.5 km range, whereas the Benson has, I think, 11.6, so a 900 meter range increase. But considering we're talking USDDs here and the arcs being what they are, you can see already how floaty the shells are when I'm shooting at something that's 6 km away. Shooting at something that's 12 km away is, of course, significantly worse. So the actual advantage offered by this range advantage is extremely minimal at best. Speaking about defensive AA, the values on the Hsienyang are actually better than Benson values. I think they're even better than Benson Sea Hull values, but the problem is you can't slot defensive AA. And if you don't have defensive AA to multiply these values, you're not going to be shooting down many planes at all, and in general your AA doesn't really have much of an impact on the battle at all. The torps are copy-paste. There's really no other way of saying it. They have exactly the same cooldown of Benson torps, which is stupidly long, 122 seconds, meaning you wait 2 minutes between torpedo launches. They deal exactly the same amount of damage, which is like 16.7k damage each, and they have, well, they both have the 9.2k range, and they are both 55 knots, as I mentioned, stupidly damn slow. The difference here is, of course, that the Hsienyang has deep water torps, which means that they have a pretty incredible concealment of 700 meters. But the Benson had already really good concealment on its torps, being able to have a concealment of 1.1 km on them. So the advantage you actually have here is 400 meters. You have a 400 meter torpedo concealment advantage, but since the Benson torps are already so incredibly stealthy, you start to get pretty diminishing returns at this point. I'm getting pretty nailed here. My team is playing very far from the cap, whereas the enemy team is playing right next to the cap. So when I try to contest and fight enemy DDs, they of course have a significantly easier time shooting me, whereas my team struggles to shoot the enemy DDs. That's a very common problem when your team plays too passive. It renders you it makes it impossible for you to contest the cap, because your team isn't giving you enough support. You can see they're 7-8 km away from me. The enemy ships are almost as close, so it makes it very difficult. Anyway, Moving on, the actual advantage offered by these deep water torps is extremely debatable. Yes, you gain 400 meters of spotting or concealment on them, but in return you can't hit any DDs at all. Now there's still some confusion regarding deep water torps. 2 months ago, Wargaming announced on their developer Facebook page, whatever, that they were recoding deep water torps for Pan Asian DDs so that the only thing they can't hit is DDs. They can hit everything else. So light cruiser, heavy cruiser, it doesn't matter. You can hit them all. Just so we clear up any confusion, since people still seems to have a bit of confusion regarding that. But so you can't hit any of the DDs, and this of course makes it extremely hard in situations like this, where there's a Loyang who's sitting in the cap with a lot of buddies, and my torps are incapable of hitting him. They are already slow, and it's already going to be really hard to hit the DD with them. But even if I do, they will just pass right underneath him. So the biggest downside of these torps is the same downside as you have with the Benson torps, and that is the slowness. The fact that both torps are so slow is the big downside. I mean, when you miss torps in this thing, it's rarely because they are spotted. Same with the Benson. It's mostly because the enemy did some small course adjustment and threw off your aim. I do manage to take down Charles Martel. He had. Well, you have almost no time to react to this unless you're running Hydro, so they are extremely brutal in that sense. This ship sounds very much like the Benson though, same weaknesses, same strengths. Pretty much, it feels exactly kind of like a Benson. The big difference really comes down to the consumables. The shorter duration, shorter cooldown smokes allows for more flexible smoke usage, but it also promotes, I guess, a bit more of a selfish play when it comes to the smokes, because, well, first of all, let's compare the smokes. If you don't run Superintendent and you have 5 Hsienyang smokes and you have 3 Benson smokes, those 3 Benson smokes last a combined 6.2 minutes. That's 3 Benson smokes. The 5 Hsienyang smokes combined last 5.8 minutes. So that's already, the Benson already has an advantage in how long it can keep a target smoked up. If we add Superintendent to this, well, you gain another 70-second smoke, but in return you also gain another 2-minute Benson smoke. So the gap becomes even larger. So when it comes to keeping a target smoked up, the Benson is much better at it. And of course, when it comes to team play, it's also much better because you don't have to babysit someone. If you smoke up a teammate in the Hsienyang, it lasts 70 seconds, and then you have to go and re-smoke him, or he has to disengage. On the Benson, you smoke someone up, and then you have 2 minutes of time to scout, torp, spot, fire, whatever. You have a lot of time to do a lot of different things, whereas in this ship, if you smoke someone up, well, you have a minute, and that's barely enough time to leave and then come back. So for team play, I would say smoke team play especially, the Benson is superior. For solo play, however, the Hsienyang smokes are much more versatile, much more flexible. You're able, if someone spots you with planes, you're able to smoke up, and you don't have to hesitate about using a smoke for that, because on the Benson you kind of hesitate using a smoke because you don't want to waste smokes, they are so valuable. But on the Hsienyang you have so many, and it's such a short duration smoke anyway that it's not really that big of a deal, and you'll have it ready in a minute regardless. So you are more readily available. The smokes are more readily available in any situation you might need it. You're fighting an enemy DD, you're trying to push a cap and take it, you get plane spotted. It's less hesitation in using these smokes for your own purposes. Whereas, of course, Benson, if you use a smoke, if you don't run Superintendent, well, you've just used a third of your smoke supply, and you only have 2 left at this point, and you have to be extremely careful with using them since they need to last you the rest of the game. So in that sense, the Hsienyang is much more flexible for solo play. Now, worth noting is of course that you can slot radar on the ship. We need to mention that. I've tried radar. I've tried to make radar work. It doesn't work. It's garbage. Probably the single most overrated thing ever, because, well, let's start with the radar stats first of all. The radar lasts 15 seconds. 15. The range is 7.5. It has a 2-minute cooldown if you run the premium version of the radar. So that means, and you have three charges. So that means without Superintendent you can radar for a total of 45 seconds. If you run Superintendent, you can radar for a total of 60 seconds. But note that this needs to be spaced out into 15-second chunks. In return, you give up your smoke, and the trade-off is not worth it. Like, the only way I've seen you can make this radar actually become more valuable than these incredibly useful smokes. I mentioned how much I like Pan Asian smokes, and they give you so much flexibility. And the only way the radar becomes more valuable than these is if you have a DD buddy in a division with you who can smoke you up if need be. Because playing these ships, especially the Hsienyang, it relies so heavily on guns to deal damage as well. Because as I mentioned, the torps have a 2-minute cooldown. If the only way you have to deal damage in a game is running the torps, you're gonna struggle to do anything, because you need to be able to use your guns. And the problem is, you fight the DD, and he smokes up, you pop your radar, that's 15 seconds. His smoke will probably still be blooming by the time your radar ends. And if he just slows down in his own smoke, well, your radar ran out, your 15 seconds of radar ran out, he's sitting in the smoke, you're not. And you're spotted by everyone because you have been firing with your 12.5 km range, and everyone on the other side of the map can see you, and they all start firing, and you're forced to retreat, and you're forced to leave the cap. The problem is that 15 seconds of radar isn't enough to kill someone. It simply is not enough time, and when people learn how short the duration of that radar is, they will easily be able to just withstand the duration. And once the radar runs out and you're stuck there without a smoke, you are pretty much dead weight. You have no option but to flee. So the tactical advantages of radar are very small. The most use I found from radar in solo play is when you don't even shoot yourself. You just radar for your teammates. You push into a cap, and then you pop your radar for your teammates, and they shoot for the 15 seconds you have, and then hopefully that's enough to kill the DDs, and you'll be able to secure the cap. If you don't kill them, then, well, then you're sitting there without smoke, and the enemy knows where you are, and, well, you're in for a really bad time. So the radar, just not worth it solo at all. In division, even in division, it's debatable because you need someone else to smoke you up. So that's a lot of resources dedicated to making your radar work, when in return you could just bring an actual radar ship, an actual radar cruiser, who could be smoked up and who could probably be significantly more useful. So the trade-off is, yeah, the radar is more kind of a gimmick. The threat of the radar is nice, but the actual impact of the radar is quite small. Anyway, this game ends. My team wasn't very interested in winning this game. It would have been, of course, a Kraken game, but since this is a test ship, I don't get any achievements, and we lose this quite convincingly. 149k damage, which I take more than happily in this ship, because, well, it's kind of a Benson. These high damage numbers in Benson, it kind of depends on if you can land your torps or not. It's very dependent on that, in fact, and because the torps are so slow, there's a lot of randomness involved in securing that damage. You also don't have the 5 guns, as I mentioned, of the Benson, you only have the 4. So, yeah, in terms of strength, well, I mean, let's look at team score here. 1.5k base, I'll take it. This was tier 8 matchmaking though, which is of course favorable to me. Still though, could have been probably a better game if my team had been a bit more involved in trying to win this game, instead of just sitting so far back in the spawn. I lost so much health early on because no one really wanted to push in and contest the cap with me. Well, besides the DD, I think the Blisko was the only one who actually made an effort. And detailed report wise, 8 torps, 85k damage. Nice chunk of flooding damage as well. I'd say 100k of my damage came from the torps, and then you have another 49k that came from the guns. That's not really the most usual spread. Usually it tends to go more 50-50, but overall it's not that bad of a score, and I'll probably take it quite happily in this ship. I mean, I would say that the Hsienyang is probably a bit weaker than the Benson. The smokes are for solo play, it might be a bit stronger. For solo play, it's questionably stronger. You give up some of that gunpowder that the Benson enjoys, but in return you have much more flexible smokes. So for solo play it might be slightly better perhaps, but if you're playing with division mates, if you're playing with teammates, then the Benson is just so much more valuable. Especially if you're running a C-Hull Benson, you have the same. If you run a superintended C-Hull Benson, you have exactly the same gun power as this one does. You have almost the same torps, except you can hit DDs. But you also have significantly longer duration smokes for teammates, and you have defensive AA to bail not just yourself but your teammates out as well. So the Hsienyang is a more selfish DD in that sense, and I mean, it's a Benson. There's not really much else. It's a Benson with some flavor, and I'm not that big of a fan of the flavor it has. Anyway, let me show you my recommended build for this ship. Right, starting off, I'll start with the modules. Now, your default range is already so good at 11.4 km that you might as well get the hull upgrade first. It gives you a bit of survivability, a bit of maneuverability, pretty standard things, makes it worth upgrading. And you can get the gun range next. You're not in any sort of hurry to get it because 11.4, as I mentioned, is more than enough. Consumable wise, premium smoke as soon as possible. You should start playing with premium smoke instantly because it's so much more powerful than the default one, and it kind of gives you that opportunity of perma-smoking your DD, which you wouldn't have with the default stock smokes. And of course, premium damage control, and if you can afford it, premium speed boost. Not as important as the smoke though. Upgrade wise, main armor is mode 1, turret and torpedo survivability, AA range, engine survivability. You can run the speed boost module if you want to as well. Acceleration mod. Now it's a bit sketchy. Personally, I think propulsion mod is still good at 3.5 second rudder shift because of the way the ship plays. A lot of sitting in smokes, a lot of stationary smoke play. Well, you see in the way the smoke works. So I think this is still better than the rudder shift. But running the rudder shift is certainly not a bad thing, and if you're extremely used to the Benson, running the rudder shift just to get the same kind of handling as you have on the Benson might be worth it just for your own comfort. And finally, concealment, of course. Captain perks wise, this is where I've started to standardize. Before this, you have to switch between a lot of different builds depending on what ship you run. But for the tier 8, tier 9 and tier 10, I've been able to run my default USDD spec, which is of course preventive maintenance, last stand, survivability expert, concealment expert, AR, torpedo reload, and the last 4 points into RPF. That's pretty much my basic gearing build, Fletcher build, and so forth. And because these are basically very similar copies to these ships, it works just as well on the Hsienyang as well. So that is absolutely my recommended setup. Flag wise, probably detonation flag, speed flag, really good on this since it bumps you up to 39.4 knots. Fire chance flag, give you 1% additional fire chance. Faster smoke usage, really the most important one. But besides that, there's not really any combat flags you should waste on this one. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this commentary, and I will talk to you guys later.